So, good evening, everyone, to all the participants in India, and good morning and good afternoon to all the participants who are attending this web lecture from various parts of the globe. We welcome you all to our talk series, Talks at Intersection 2020. Most of the registered participants have joined. However, if your friends or colleagues have not registered or facing certain difficulties in joining on this platform, they can also watch this web lecture live on our Facebook page, Intersection Foundation. This web lecture will consist of 60 minutes of presentation, followed by 15 minutes of question and answers. We'll moderate the question and answers with our guest speaker after his presentation. So I request everyone to put up your questions in the Q&A box below. Before we begin, I would like to share a brief about Intersection Foundation. So Intersection Foundation was founded in 2017 by a group of collaborators with an objective to create an ecosystem of multidisciplinary excellence in architecture, design, urban studies, and next generation skill acquisition. We bridge the gap between academia and industry. We do this by forging partnerships with institutes, universities, and organizations to provide a platform for students and professionals to develop a multidisciplinary approach in education and practice. We organize travel and learn workshops to various parts of India and abroad. We organize experiential workshops to help new skills to be developed. We also offer professional and certificate courses under Intersection Foundation. However, if you need more details, you can visit our Facebook and Instagram page to know more about our activities and previous workshops. The current talk series called Talks at Intersection 2020 will focus on multimodal practices. This web lecture series explores the widths and the depths of the contemporary architecture practices of 6 selected architects across the globe. Today, we have with us Mr. Assaf Ben Nun from Israel. Next week, on 6th of June, at the same time, the second speaker, Mr. Manish Gulati from Mofa Studio in Delhi, will be our next speaker. Similarly, we have 4 other speakers from various parts of the globe who will be a part of Talks at Intersection 2020. Our current speaker for today, Mr. Assaf Ben Nun, is an Israeli architect who co-founded his practice, Amsterdam Ben Nun, along with his partner. It was established in 2005, and they have worked on a plethora of projects for various program typology and scale. I would like to invite Mr. Assaf to share his presentation. Mr. Assaf, thank you for joining us. I hand over the Zoom platform to you.
Thank you. So, can everybody see?
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. My name is Assaf Ben Nun, and I would like to thank Intersection Foundation for inviting us to talk with you today. Our practice, Amsterdam Ben Nun Architects, it was founded in 2005 after me and my partner, Meital Amsterdam, graduated from the Israeli Institute of Technology in the Faculty of Architecture and Town Planning in Israel, in Haifa, in the northern part of Israel. I will show you today 3 projects that our office currently was dealing and accomplished in the last few years. But before that, Let me.
Mr. Assaf, sorry to interrupt. Can you make it full screen? We are able to see two screens at the same time.
Is it okay like this?
Yeah, this is better. Yeah.
Okay. So we started our practice in September 2005 after we had a long journey in India for about half a year, in which we met this young gentleman, Mr. Banu Pratap Sharma, with whom we traveled for a while and later on stayed time with him in Ahmedabad after they graduated from architecture school there. And so I would like to thank also Banu for reaching out for me and inviting us for the lecture. Ever since we started our practice in 2005, the first thing we did was to participate in an architecture competition for the design of a quite big educational compound in the northern part of Israel, for which we gained second prize. It was very surprising for us. It was the first thing we do upon establishing the practice. And even though we didn't get the project done, it was clear for us that we wanted to establish ourselves in public buildings rather than in other aspects of architecture. Even though for young architects as ourselves, mostly the start is much easier within small projects, above all single houses. So we did also that, single housing, but never stopped reaching out for a architectural competition because that we thought that would be the best way for us to make ourselves into this field, which is usually handled with more experience and big offices. Here I can show you an addition of a wing to an existing school in the city of Akko. It's an ancient city in the northern part of Israel, an old town. You can see here the old moat with an existing educational compound to which we needed to add a laboratorial wing to an existing junior high building. So we thought to have it around an inner court and thus giving this school an additional and valuable inner space as well as the building itself. Another educational building was this school in Ramat Efal in the center of Israel, where they had this big park where the project should have suggested a school, and we thought to leave the park to the civilians and to construct the school underneath, and thus making the two projects work together. Another school, School of Music in Akko, still Akko, the town before, is focusing in inner courtyards, which are very typical to the Mediterranean old and ancient towns and cities. Among the competition, we also managed to here and there get a hold of projects that we were able to construct. This is a daycare center in a very dense neighborhood in Haifa. It's one of the three biggest cities in Israel. And most of the neighborhood looks like that, very dull and unnoticed in colors and shapes. And we thought to landmark this building by introducing unique colors that will attract the attention and make a landmark of it in the midst of the neighborhood. Another competition that is currently undergoing, we are waiting for the results to be announced, is another school in Kiryat Yam. It's another northern municipality in Israel. It's an urban school. It means it's high rise, and we tried to make it with many courtyards possible in this way to open it up to the lack of shortage of spaces. Many kindergartens as well as daycare centers were built in Israel in the last years because it's a very growing population. This is an example for one such kindergarten, which was not realized in the end. And also factories. This is an advanced carpentry factory in Nazareth, where Jesus was born, for all you know him. It's constructed, consists of a main office building wing and a rare manufacturing hall. And for the owner of this factory, it was very important to give attention to the design of it because that's what are the demands of his clients. He usually cater for highly budgeted clients with most of the high-end architects in Israel. A memorial hall in a very small town. It's a small memorial hall, also a competition. And a conservatory in a town near Jerusalem, which we wanted to keep below street level in order to make the people passing by and using it to overlook the hills of Jerusalem. And last but not least, a competition for the design of a national emergency center in the center of Israel, where they should train the municipalities to handle disasters and extreme situations such as earthquakes, tsunamis, and wars, including launch of missiles upon the civilian population. So let me now continue. You see this? No? Well, I'm having some. Okay. I will now elaborate on a project that we recently finished in the city of Haifa in northern Israel. I don't know how many of you know Israel. Haifa is the third biggest city in the country. It's not far from the border with Lebanon. And the project is in the midst of the metropolitan center. It's a port city, Haifa. And what we were commissioned in this project is the design, is the renovation of an existing cultural center in an existing neighborhood that was all designed by Professor Al Mansfeld. Is one of the most important architects in the historical architecture of Israel, and he also designed this building in the 1960s. Al Mansfeld was a structuralist. You may know other structuralists, architects such as Hermann Herzberger and Aldo van Eyck. His most noted project is the Museum of Israel, which is a structuralist scheme of pavilions, open-ended, that can be growing according to this certain scheme for as long as the plot provides. And the current cultural center is called Abba Hushi Cultural Center, also answers to the same conceptual themes of structuralism. It was originally designed as a very big balcony, and with the entire project dropping below, and one would access this balcony from the street and enter these pavilions and go down for all the functions and all the possibilities that were underneath it within the center itself. It was sitting on the slope, and this way that slope could held all these spaces and functions. During the years, this balcony was leaking, and all the water went down to the holes below. And during the year, the municipality had to cover it with a roof in order to prevent from water to go in. And so this space that was formed beneath this roof was kept like that for many years. And it was provisionally used for various reasons, but never was really taken care of in the sense of system. It was very hot in the summers, very cold in the winters. It was not air conditioned, not properly serviced by electricity, and for most reasons it was like a very potential resource that was never used. And our mission was to convert this into a functional part of this cultural center, which is very important in the life of the city. So as I told you, Alfred Mansfeld was a structuralist, which means that he always sought for the basic fragment that would construct a project, both technically and conceptually. And in this project, he modulated it within squares of about 4 meters by 4 meters. These are random manifestations of these square stairs, holes in the balcony, and even the pattern of the existing pavement. And that was how the infrastructure upon which he based his entire project, not only architecturally, but also construction-wise. We took this vast space and divided it into programmatically into various subspaces, mainly a multi-purpose hall, which was much needed in this cultural center, entrance and lobbies, pavilions, service pavilions, a pavilion for the cafeteria, pavilion for the restrooms, toilets, and above all, a pavilion for tickets and information, which overlook the entrance as well as the main hall. We also dealt with the existing offices of the center and completely changed their articulation according to the needs of the management. We took definitions of the seating in the for the cafeteria, and also designed the balconies. If you remember, from the former photos, the provisional envelope of the building was going along its perimeters, and we thought we'd withdraw the envelope inside, and thus to emphasize the origins of the building, which is a brutalist architecture at its best. Another thing was most important was to add a connection between the upper floor and a lower floor where are the main auditorium, which exists, and it was not under our mandate of design. Up until that moment, the people would use to go from the entrance and go straight to the stairs below and make their way to the auditorium in a non-direct way. So we found this very spot in order to add these stairs, only to find out that it was above a route that was of a street that was going underneath this existing cultural center. So it had to be taken under consideration regarding construction methodology, etc. One very important aspect of the design was that the existing roof that was constructed like 20 or 25 years after the original building was completed, its geometry was such that it created 6 basins of drainage. And if you can see, these 6 basins of drainage were falling inside the perimeter of the existing hall. They used to solve this problem by putting in drainage pipes that would take the drainage from all these basins and get them outside. We didn't want to hear about maintaining this solution, because we knew the minute we make all this renovation, all the leakage that used to be from these pipes all these years will continue within the renovated building, and that was out of the question. So what we did, we analyzed the structure of this very unique roof and found out, if you see it in red, the existing trusses, that if we heighten the ridge, a ridge within the axis of in the center of this ridge, of this roof, and add supporting trusses above the existing one, we can change the drainage scheme of the building and send the water to the outside of its perimeter. And that was a very important decision to make. Within these, what you see here in orange, is the gap between the existing roof and the new roof that we were suggesting. All the machinery, air conditioning ducts, electricity, etc., could service the hall and the entire floor. And that's how the roof looks after it's finished. I can show you here briefly the composition of the facades and the envelope of the new envelope of the project. And up until 4 meter high, we have a curtain wall, and above are panels you can see here in green of polycarbonate that gives a very unique light into the building. So one very crucial aspect of the decision and solution we needed to find was what to do with the paving, because the balcony was using an existing, we call it a granulite. It's a mix of aggregates and cement. That was the topping of the existing floor, and it was undulated because it was needed to drain the entire surface of the balcony. And we couldn't, according to the engineer, the construction engineer, we couldn't add anything above it other than terrazzo epoxy of 2-3 millimeters, because he feared that the original structure wouldn't hold it. So what ultimately was decided is to destroy and eliminate the existing 10 centimeter thick concrete with aggregate floor and introduce a new stone pavement. You can see your photos during the construction. It was quite a challenge to construct within an existing building, functional building. It functioned during all the construction, the time of construction. People used to come here and go through this construction site to their activities. This is the cafeteria under construction. And here you can see the main hall before it was covered underneath with the new ceilings. The construction of the curtain wall undergoing. And here you can see, I emphasized it, the duct of the air conditioning that's going in the gap between the two existing roofs. Step by step, they finished closing and covering the entire gap. You can see the light going through the polycarbonate panels and the beginning of the fenestration of the curtain walls. An outer photo reflects the additional new trusses upon the existing ones to create the much wanted new scheme of the roof. And here you can see the edges of the air conditioning system before they were connected to the main units. The construction of the staircase volume, ultimately constructed with steel instead of beton, cement. And a look to the neighborhood designed by Al Mansfeld, which is very brutalist, and it was much recognized in Europe during this era of the 60s. And those are already photos of the finished project after it was populated. The main hall here with the balcony overlooking the neighborhood. And going down to from the stairs to the auditorium below. People entering to the main lobby with the cafeteria in the background, and a view from the entrance towards the junction of the pavilions of services. So at the end, even though it was not a mandate of ours to deal much with the external aspects of the project, we can see that it changed much of its look, because we tried to eliminate many additions that were not very current, not even with the addition of the new roof that was in a large extent a bit foreign to the original design of Al Mansfeld. So let me pass to the next project. It's an elementary school in the northern part of Israel, this time very north, extreme north, right on the border with Lebanon. This school is about to begin construction. It began construction 2 weeks ago after a very long process of design. It was the result of a competition that we participated in 1917 and won the first prize for it, and for that we got the project done. It's held within the civilian center of a regional council in the northern part of Israel, where they have the offices of the municipality, an existing sport hall, clinics, and they wanted to construct the new school at this plot designated here. And this plot is characterized by an extreme slope going from east to west of about 15 to 20 degrees and about 7 degrees from north to south. It was quite a challenge to introduce a school which is based on a high accessibility for children, not just for people with disabilities. And that was the main challenge dealing with in this project. Now, as you can see, there are main three wings, like fingers, uh, consisting of this school, plus two structures in the east. They serve as the administratorial wing of the school, while each such building is a building of classrooms. It's an elementary school from first grade to sixth, so there are like 2 grades here occupying this building, 2 here, and 2 here. And the reason it's divided into 3 is because the Ministry of Education in Israel is the main financier of schools in the country. And it demands that each school can be accomplished in 3 phases according to its rate of financing. So we will give money to construct the first phase, and then the second phase, and ultimately the third phase. That's why they call it a growing school. And this scheme derives mostly out of these constraints. You can see here the way a typical building holds the ground. There is a fall of about 10 meters along the average length width of the slope, which makes it very challenging. We decided to locate its original school, its original municipality and its original school, which means that students will come to the school by buses. And we thought we needed to locate a better bus terminal for the school buses rather than the one that was suggested by the authorities that would be here. We thought that it was in this plot with all these constraints, it would be very, very difficult to spare this space for buses. And we suggested that they will be located beyond the plot designated for the school, in a vacant part of the entire center. So we put it there, and from there it was much easy to access the entrance of the school here. So what we have here, if you could see in one of the beginning slides, we are sitting in a forest, practically, in a Mediterranean forest, a very green one. And we thought of combining the constructed and the open and allow the nature to reach its hands inside school while we are reaching our constructed fingers towards nature. And that's about the scheme of open and built. And here you can see the overall floor of the upper floor. The structure of the school, from entrance to its bottom, it's of a street-like walkway upon which the buildings of the classrooms are splitted, are being evolving from. We chose to deal with the 7% slope from north to south by grading the buildings of about half the floor. If a floor from bottom floor to main floor is about 3.5 meters, the buildings are lowered half a floor, 1.75 centimeters from one another. And we handle those gaps with ramps and with elevators each building has its own elevator, and thus is handling all these leveling of the site. We allowed for a path going from the outer courtyard of the smaller children in the school, first grade and second grade, up until the bottom of the school via all these houses, all these buildings. There's a track that you can practically go from this point, go down the stairs, and follow the entire school as you go. A typical yard between the buildings. We used to harness the natural basin of drainage of the school with landscape that holds the water. In some cases, I will show you an example of it, constructed example of it in the next project. So it functions and it gives the teachers a base for education upon this very natural aspect of drainage, of natural drainage of the plot. Now, as I said, we have on beyond the school fence is the forest, the nature, and the municipality, they wanted us to allow for opening so the teacher can take kids for a walk in the park or walk in the forest, just leaving the school not from the main entrance but from its perimeter. A very important aspect of the development of the site are places where external classes can take place, because this school was part of an innovative pilot made by the Ministry of Education for about 10 schools around the country, in which the whole conceptual of concept of education would comprise of a different one that is held in the regular educational system. And the main aspect of that is that learning can be done everywhere, not just within a classroom, but also in non-formal spaces within the building, and above all, in external places adjacent to the building. So we used all these differences in the levels of the site due to its topography to create many amphitheater-like spaces. The teacher can give a class outside. Let's take a look at a typical building. The tail adjacent to the main street that we said varies from building to building. It holds global and public functions serving the entire school, but the front of it, it's a two-story wing, and that's, let's say, it's the private home of the children that study in this particular building. You enter the building in its upper level, where you can find classrooms and communal gatherings. We designed the separations between the classroom as acoustics panels that can be removed and combine the spaces into one big family, one big classroom. This is also an aspect of the innovative approach, which means that no longer a frontal lecture, but rather 2 or 3 teachers will have group experience of teachings or leading of the self exploration of the students under their supervision. And in the lower floor are the next grade. If above, let's say it was a fourth grade, and beneath you can find a third grade. And from that floor, you can either go to this yard or to the other one, to the next one. This enables interactions between children of various ages, actually, because to this court would also come the children from the adjacent building. Wherever possible, we allowed for a direct exit from the classes to outside. And that's how the communal space of the entire building, of the entire house, looks like. Again, a stirred space where you can hold a lecture, a lesson, and it harnesses the slope of the plot. Here you can see in the background the entrance, the main entrance from the street to this house. I will now show you another school. This school was built and housed, populated in September 2018. It was the result of a competition that we won in 2016 for the design of another innovative school in the northern part of Israel. That's not far from where we live, but still, as you can see, most of our projects evolved around the northern part of Israel. So this is, again, a regional council, very much spread. Here in the red is Lebanon, and the boundaries of this regional council are not very organized, let's say. And this school was about to serve 5 or 6 small villages or settlements in its vicinity. The plot here in yellow is in what we call a kibbutz. I don't know how many of you heard of this form of Israeli settlement. It's a unique form. I suggest you to go and learn about it a bit because it's very, very interesting. It's one of the most unique forms of social settlements made by mankind. You guys have been visiting Orville. I've heard from Mr. Banu. It shares a few similarities with these concepts. And in this kibbutz, they designated a plot within the boundaries of the kibbutz for a school, and they offered this plot for the local municipality, and they were about to construct a school here. Now, kibbutz is a place that was originally based on agricultural economy activity, and is mostly characterized by small buildings, low silhouettes, and vast openings and the open spaces. And that was one of our main things that we wanted to introduce to this project within the boundaries of the kibbutz. Plus, as one of the leaders for the foundation of Israel, in the kibbutz were also many important architects that were responsible for the construction of most of the buildings of the kibbutz architectural movement. and we wanted the school to make a gesture to them. So this is how the plot looks like. You can see these two colors. This is for the school, and that's for the bus terminal, because also this is a regional school. The kids come from different settlements by buses. And that's how it looked like before construction began. It was an agricultural grove of avocados and bananas, and they were all taken away in the beginning of the construction, but we managed to leave a small strip of these circling this space. You can see it later on in the photos. So again, but in a larger extent as the first project, we divided the school into two main aspects. One is the administrative buildings, which holds also laboratories and communal studying spaces, such as the library and the science and technological rooms. This is management over here. And 6 different pavilions for each grade. You can see here the bus terminal. The entrance to the building, to the school, is from here. That would be later on the sport hall. And we wanted to separate those buildings by a system of corridors, external corridors that would connect the entire structure. The gross net proportion here is almost 1-to-1, because there are no corridors and no passages which are not part of the external spaces of the school. The articulation of the buildings close an inner courtyard, and it's a courtyard that is made of 4 fragments, that each one is in this or another way related to the pavilion it sits next to. But altogether, they make a system of open spaces. And this is where children from different ages meet. While on the outskirts of the school, each pavilion has its own private yard, which is made specifically for their own group of age. I will later on elaborate on the articulation of a typical pavilion. So construction began, and as I said, we wanted to make a gesture to the kibbutz architecture, which is quite unique in the history of architecture in Israel. And one of the things is the exposed concrete, which is very much common and in kibbutz architecture, and is gotten into very high degrees of achievements. Here you can see the entrance to the school, as I showed you on the plan. We wanted to connect it with the bus waiting sheds to make it an integral part of school, and not just a leftover that usually the way it is usually held and dealt with in other regional schools that we studied from and explored before going to the design of this one. So once again, the exposed concrete is a wing, and it revolves and creates the entrance gate of the school. You can see the names of the different settlements at the bus stop. And that's a view within the inner the inner space of school, which is a sequence, as I said, of courtyards that create the integral courtyard. So you can see in the background such a pathway, a corridor, that is never a corridor actually. It is always part of the space, only a covered one, a bit behind bars, a bit separated, but always a part of the integral space within. So no closed corridors here. This is the courtyard of first grade, which is always the grade which comes from the kindergarten into the school, where also bigger children study, and they always need their own sheltered space that is designated just for them. Some resemblance from the yard of the kindergarten. We used many patios and open spaces within the structure of the school in order to make different kinds of both experience and places where children can gather and learn. As I said, this school was also part of the first pilot of the Ministry of Education for innovative approaches in education. And it was very important to make place for external learning and other opportunities rather than just to study within the walls of a classroom. You can see here in the background is the library opening up to this patio where a teacher can take a class with the books and they can read here outside. While here we see a private backyard of one of the pavilions, one of the grades. And they can go out of their classroom. There are 3 classrooms in each grade, and they can go out and have an activity here. They can leave the door open and do it both outside and inside. And it was very important for us to maintain this hierarchy of open spaces, as well as the hierarchy of inner spaces that I will show you in a minute. This is such a pathway between 2 pavilions, connecting the internal square, internal yard, which is global and more, I remember the word, and the private one in the outskirts. And this is how a typical pavilion looks like. It's almost self-sufficient. We have 3 classrooms, and they all gather around a communal space. So teachers can have an activity either in this classroom or to join it with an external activity within the boundaries of the pavilion, or to take it outside. They have a covered pathway that goes into the external main yard, or to go outside to the more private one. You can see the flow of the spaces within the section. In Israel, there is a regulation of shelters. Each building in Israel, be it a small house, a public building, office building, whatever, needs to provide its shelter, and I mean shelter in the sense of missile attack and war. So each pavilion holds this shelter. You can see how thick those walls are, and we use these shelters as classrooms of different scales and different for smaller groups of children that needs to be given more specific attention. and of course all the services and toilets within this pavilion. This is an example of a communal space of a pavilion. You can see in the background the classrooms. They are transparent. So whatever activity is made in this classroom, you can take a few groups outside and maintain visibility and connectivity during the lesson. Each pavilion we gave a different color in order to distinguish themselves, because other than that, their characteristics are quite the same. They are repetitive. This is the green one of the 4th grade. And this is a bit different of 1st grade. It's a bit different from others, but works on the same concept. As you can see, we've put a clear story with windows for the circulation of hot air and passive ventilation, which is very, very important also in the aspect of this school. And you can see also within a classroom, you can see the clear story of windows, high windows above that are opened electrically and allows for hot air to be released. And this is a view from the classroom through the transparent wall into the private yard of this pavilion, allowing for a teacher to have a lesson or to conduct an educational activity both inside and outside at the same time. This is the teacher's room. And this is the science laboratory. We also designed the internal equipment and furnishing, and took the conceptual, morphological concept from the building itself to the classroom. And you can see here details. We combined within these concrete walls those rings of metal. And as you can see, they are much appreciated by the children, and they play with it all the time. You, as an architect, often you don't get to tell the story, but you create the opportunities. And what is amazing about children, that you can trust them to always find the things that you didn't even imagine to do with whatever environment you provide them with. You can see here in the background, as I said earlier in the previous project, this also main yard, the drainage system, we harnessed it to create an artificial lake within, and by this give the opportunity to the children and the teachers to study about what happens when in winter time this pond gets filled with water and frogs come and flourish within, and water flora starts to grow, and yet it's part of the drainage system of the school. And that's about it. Anu?
Yeah, Assaf. Assaf, brilliant work. I mean, you just shown me a couple of photographs of the project that you have done, but since you have walked us through your entire projects, the way you have sort of conceptualized and developed your drawings, and the kind of detail in which you have resolved and sort of developed the project. I think it's, I mean, you're up there, with some of the best lecture series that we have seen and attended. So thank you very much. I have a couple of questions, and let me just check if what are the questions that have come up from the participants. Anyone want to ask any more questions to Assaf? I can quickly. I'll sort of take down your questions. Otherwise, to begin with, I have few questions that have already been asked by participant. Let me just open the list of questions that have come in. Just a second. Yeah, Assaf, you said that you strongly believe in the quality of architectural plans, and they are the main generator of your projects, on its various layers and systems. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. As I showed you before in this project, in these lectures, there is this methodology of the structuralist movement. You see in the work of Professor R. Mansfeld and others. They generate a system, and it can be any system, but they have it has its own rules, and they put it down, and they let this also lead them and enables them to construct their design according to certain rules. And I think that these restraints and these methodologies, they enable us to develop a plan which has a higher logic, because you can approach the blank paper and you can start evolving from the emptiness of it and let it lead you. We really believe in some sort of way that we can adjust and snap into rules that dictates a higher hierarchy. And what we find ourselves doing is finding and refining the plan according to these logics. And we in many cases, let this lead us and let the volumetric approach and volumetric decisions emerge from this, the logics of the plan. Okay. It's sometimes mostly, I think, in this area where volumes can be lifted and given life into very easily with software means. It's very allegedly easy to create architecture. We think that this architecture should derive from something which is more abstract and more fundamental, and to be hierarchical and to rise from this plan.
I mean, in a way, throughout your lecture, it seems like a lot of rational decisions, they come into play. In a way, your projects, they consider all the rational decisions that you sort of take along the way, and integrate all your rational requirements and decision together. But in a way, the output becomes more abstract. Where is the transition between, from I'm not, but how do you integrate the rational and the abstract? You know what I mean?
Yeah, Well, I'm not sure it will always be that way in every project, but when we approach a project and we analyze all the factors that will make the equation that from which the project will evolve, so there are some which are always in the back of our mind. We don't necessarily let them lead. For example, when we go and design this renovation of this cultural center, we know that one of the biggest problems is the leakages of water in the roof. We know they have problems of they're lacking the mechanics of air conditioning and stuff. And we know that they need to be taken care under consideration. But I can't say that this is a leading case for us, but we always keep all these prosaic aspect of the design in mind, and they are always there when we make decisions which are on a higher scale. For example, even though sometimes it may not be clear to the contractors or even for our client, when we construct the building, when we approach such a project, we think of its values, of past values, of the one who designed it, of the background from which the original building was evolving. We took this grid and these the structural grid of the 4x4 and reflect it on the envelope above, encircling it. So there are aspects which are important for us, and there are aspects which we know we're going to have to integrate at this point or another, but they don't necessarily lead these ideas.
Okay, Assaf, another question we have is, how do you conceptualize your design and integrate them in form of like the output, the drawings, and how do you sort of develop the project further? So I think basically the question is, how do you conceptualize your design? What is your design process in that sense?
Well, I think something I can honestly say about our practice is that in a very early phase of the project, we have some sort of an image. It can be very abstract. It doesn't have to be manifesting itself in a sketch or in a section, but we want to achieve something. And we first want to define this for ourselves, because the better it is clear to us, the better we can, along the process of design, check ourselves whether we are in the direction to accomplish this concept, where be it abstract or less abstract. For example, we in the project of the school in Beit Ha'emek, in Etem, the last project I showed you, we were working in a kibbutz, and we knew what are the needs or what are the qualities that are characterizing these kind of places, the pavilions, the defragmentation of the masses, and the materials. We knew we wanted to go in this direction, and we let these aspects lead us, and gradually we derived from other aspects of the design and of the demands and of the restraints of the project that come from external players, not necessarily our conceptual aspirations, and we let them refine all these abstract image of the beginning. And we constantly ask ourselves, is this, when it changes, because a conceptual idea not necessarily is a space or an image, but we always ask ourselves whether this described well what abstract idea or preliminary idea we had in mind.
Mhm. Another question, how does climate variation within your country help you think? How does, what is the kind of climate in your region, and how does climate impacts and influence your design?
Well, the Mediterranean climate is relatively moderate if you compare it to the Indian climate, which is very hot and humid. But it is a hot country in the summers, and most of the design aspects are towards the hot months of the year rather than the cold ones, that it would be more common in Northern Europe and North America, for example. So we actually, in every project of ours, there are things that we do, it's like a checklist, without even defining to ourselves, we're going to make a green project or a climatical project. There are things on our toolbox that we try to achieve in every project. It's the positioning of the buildings, north and south. Is the creation of passive elements of shading. The ability to open openings in opposite direction to allow for natural wind and air to go. There is in the Mediterranean architecture, let's say traditional architecture, and you can find it all along the Mediterranean coast. There's a typology that repeats itself, and it repeats itself in many typologies of and scales of building. And that is the gradual entrance from the public space into the inner space. I think it's something that you can also find in Indian architecture. The Havelis, for example, which have many times have an outer court from which you enter the house itself. So also in the Mediterranean traditional scheme, there is a gradual entry, axis of entrance from the public space to the inner space, and this hierarchy of spaces also allows for the moderation of and control passively of the climate and weather from outside to an inner one, which is more shaded, and into the building itself. So there are a lot to learn from the traditional architecture typologies of the Mediterranean Sea.
Just two last questions. One is someone is interested in understanding the selection of material plays an important role in integrating spaces while approaching the building, and would it impact the sensory experience of the user?
You're going to have to repeat this question. I didn't understand.
Does the selection of material play an important role in integrating spaces while approaching the building? The selection of material play an important role, and what is the impact of the material on the sensory experience of the user?
Well, materials make a very important role in the building, of course. Another question that should be associated with these, what are our options when we design certain types of buildings. For example, when we design a school, it's a place of extreme usage of many users, and usually characterized by low means of maintenance. And when you design a cultural center, it's not exactly the same case. So we usually try to adapt the proper materials to the proper program and definition of the project. And another aspect of it is not just that, it's the ability of the local know-how and technologies of the people constructing the building itself. You always have to keep in mind that you should try to adapt what you do to what best will result eventually in the building. So, for example, the choice of exposed concrete in a school is a choice that takes both these aspects into mind. We know that it will last and it will hold in a proper manner. We know that it needs low maintenance, and we can clearly make distinctions within the architecture itself by using this. It has a very high recognition in many places, and it can be used to define entrances, define key elements and key places within a plot, within a project.
One last question, like since you, as you said, you travel extensively in India before sort of you went back and you started your practice. Any influences or learnings from your experience in India that sort of you continue or has sort of continued or influenced you in your work?
Well, I don't think there is a place in India that I didn't learn something from. I mean, in the beginning, the first thing, as you all know, it is very, very diverse. You see the traditional construction in the northern parts of Ladakh and Himachal, timber architecture, and the way they used to construct in Rajasthan and in Ahmedabad, and all the way down to the south. So I think one of the things that really touched me is the traditional skills of the artisans. I've been in places where I saw the craftsmen sit and work. I could have watched them for hours. I mean, and they were not just making this skill or for traditional reasons only. I mean, you saw that there are projects being constructed this way, and you saw how brilliantly these skills and these construction traditions, they go from father to son, and the way they implement themselves in past projects and are being implemented now. And I think it was something that, for me, it was an amazing thing to see, because sometimes we think here that not only we are beginning to forget things that our ancestors knew on design, the skills of construction in Israel also changes. And I'm sure I haven't been in India for 15 years. I'm sure it rapidly changes as well. But it was fascinating to see the way that these craftsmanships were being preserved and being still used and still evident. And I think it's very, very important in to a culture of a place. This continuity.
You'd also been to Auroville. You'd also been to.
I've also been to Orville. Orville is a different organ. It is a muchly intervened by people from abroad, not necessarily Indians, also many Indians, and it's an experimental ground in a way. So both social and the way I experienced it also environmental. And it was very, very interesting to see this. It was very interesting to see also the collaboration. It's not like it's not a project that landed there from an outer space. It grew up from the local culture.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I guess I think we have run out of time now. But Assaf, thank you very much. I thank you on behalf of my students who are attending this lecture. A lot of my students are doing their projects in Auroville. Probably we can have you again for the reviews as we have discussed. But I appreciate a lot, and I thank you, Mohit Kapoor, also from Intersection Foundation, to sort of help us to coordinate with you and have this lecture. Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you to all the participants.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.